Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I commend the Honourable Member for Northampton South for the excellent points that he's made, apart from his support for the privatisation bill. But I hope the Minister will listen carefully to his points, because they illustrate that this is a cross-party matter. There's a genuine fear about what is going to happen to the Royal Mail. And in making those points, Madam Deputy Speaker, could I apologise to you and to the House that I do need to go and answer questions following the Northern Ireland statement in interviews, so I won't be here for the wind-ups. I do that as a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was privileged to work for the Union of Post Office Workers, as it was then called, in the 1970s, and continued for 14 years into its new incarnations before I was elected to this House. And what has always worried me greatly about the competition regime that we find around the Royal Mail is that it is not a level playing field. Competitors to the Royal Mail are not treated the same as the Royal Mail is. And this is causing great danger, I believe, to the nature of the universal service obligation, not to its existence, which has been pointed out as provided in statute under the government's legislation. I'm not arguing that. But it doesn't define what the universal service obligation is. And I may say, my criticisms of this competition regime, which has basically stayed the same as it's transferred to Ofcom from its predecessor, apply to our previous Labour government as well. It's not simply against this government. There's been a failure to understand the fundamental problem about this whole matter, which is that Royal Mail has to deliver not just to Swansea from London or to Cardiff from London, which it's easy to do and cheap to do, straight down the M4. It has to deliver up valley communities like mine in Cwmlynfech or Rhuvaul, which it's expensive to do. And that's where the cost is provided, let alone the constituencies represented by honourable members from Scotland or other parts of Wales, for example, or indeed rural parts of England. The expensive part of the delivery network is getting it not between city centres, which TNT and other competitors love to do, often with, I will in a moment, often with, by the way, it applies to Northern Ireland as well, she's going to correct me on that. The easy part, which competitor companies like TNT obviously seize upon, is to get pre-sorted business mail provided to them by the businesses themselves, large-scale deliveries from the banks and credit card companies and others such. They bring it in pre-sorted cassettes and containers, and then TNT rush it down on the M4 or whatever distribution network they use, and that's cheap to do. The expensive part, and then often they dump it back into the Royal Mail so that they have to do the expensive part of the delivery to these remote areas. This is the problem. And so I believe it's a matter of urgency, a point that's been made earlier on in this debate, and a matter of urgency that both the government and Ofcom grasp this problem and sort it out urgently. It can't wait till late next year. That'll be too late for the Royal Mail. And what I predict will happen to the universal service if this delay continues is, yes, it'll be there in name, but it won't necessarily apply for 6 days, because that's not in statute. It won't necessarily apply door-to-door, because that's not actually required on a 6-day delivery basis. It is required to every address, but it doesn't define what that address is, as far as I know, over 6 days, and so on. So it is no good sheltering behind the commitment in the Act under the honouring of the universal service obligation. It is not defined. And where we look at the experience elsewhere, in New Zealand, for example, after a similar process was followed, we find that actually you've seen a steady erosion of it. Can I give way to the Honourable Lady?
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm most grateful to the Right Honourable Member for Neath in giving way to me, and also for mentioning the remote areas of Northern Ireland as well as the remote areas of Wales and Scotland. I wonder, would the Right Honourable Member just take this opportunity, since he has already mentioned that he was a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, just to put on the record the enormous sacrifice and courage of postal workers, Royal Mail workers, throughout the worst of the troubles in Northern Ireland, many who paid with their lives and others who were held hostage or very, very badly injured in bomb explosions. I would like the Right Honourable Member just to mention that for the record, please.
I'm very grateful to the point that my honourable friend has made, because she's absolutely right. Postal workers, postmen and women, were extremely vulnerable in the terror and the troubles, paid for their lives in some instances, and had suffered terrible deprivations in others. And that just brings us back to the value of the posties that we all depend on, especially if we don't live in city centres. Well, we depend on them as well, but they may be other posties from other than the Royal Mail. But you will not find TNT's staff delivering up Snowdonia, or delivering up in the Highlands, or delivering in some of the very remote areas of Northern Ireland, despite the fact that they had to in Royal Mail, under Royal Mail, prior to this new regime, during the Troubles, which she quite rightly draws our attention to. And so I just emphasise, Madam Deputy Speaker, in concluding, that the problem with this whole competition regime is it allows competitors to the Royal Mail to cherry-pick and cream skim the most profitable mail. And unless you rapidly increase the access charges that those competitors have in order to dump their mail back into the Royal Mail to make sure that it gets delivered to the final address when these addresses are in remote areas, unless you increase the access charges, which are pitifully low at the moment, and unless you do it urgently, and unless Ofcom gets out of its sleeping trance on this matter, and unless the government instructs it, if that is what is required, and I ask the Minister in my absence, for which again I apologise, to answer this point, unless that is done urgently, I fear for the future of the universal service, the quality of that service, and the ability of Royal Mail to provide it as it is required to do, but as none of its competitors, Madam Deputy Speaker, are so required.